The sun was setting over the wide land of Montana, painting the sky with soft orange light. The wind moved gently across the dry grass as a man named Eli Turner stood near the small train station, waiting for the coach that was supposed to bring his new bride. In his hand he held a letter, folded and opened so many times that the edges had become soft. The words were simple, a promise from a woman he had never met but who had agreed to marry him through a mail-order service. Eli had written to the agency months ago, asking for a kind woman who wanted a quiet life on a ranch. He wasn't looking for beauty or wealth. He only wanted peace, someone who would share the silence of his home, someone who would talk to him in the evenings and laugh with him when the cattle wandered too far. His days were long and lonely. He had no family left, no neighbors close by. The only sounds he usually heard were the creak of the barn door and the wind whispering through the empty fields. When he finally heard the whistle of the approaching stagecoach, Eli's heart beat faster. He brushed the dust from his jacket and adjusted his hat. Around him, a few townspeople had gathered, curious to see the rancher's new bride arrive. The coach rolled in, wheels clattering against the wooden boards of the street, leaving behind a trail of golden dust. The driver jumped down, shouting, "Passenger from Chicago." He opened the door and a woman stepped out slowly. She carried a small suitcase and wore a travel-worn dress that once might have been fine silk. Her hair was a deep auburn red, shining in the sunlight even after the long journey. For a few seconds the crowd fell silent. Every man at the station stared, and Eli felt his throat tighten. Someone behind him whispered, "Ain't that Clara Weston?" Another voice followed. "The one from Chicago? The one who used to work in the city's bad district?" Eli's hand stiffened. He had heard that name before. Whispered stories told by men who had traveled east. Clara Weston had once been known for her beauty, and for her life that many judged harshly. But what was she doing here, stepping off the coach with his letter in her hand? The woman looked around, her green eyes scanning the faces. When her gaze met Eli's, something flickered inside him, surprise, confusion, and something he could not explain. She walked toward him slowly, the dust rising around her boots, and said in a calm, quiet voice, "You must be Eli Turner. I'm your bride." Eli blinked, unable to speak. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The paper in her hand and his letter matched the one in his pocket. Everything was official. Somehow, through some strange mistake, the agency had sent Clara Weston, a woman with a reputation from another world, to be his wife. The men standing nearby laughed softly, nudging each other. "Looks like you got yourself a famous lady, Eli," one of them said. But Eli didn't laugh. He could see that Clara's hands were trembling as she held the letter. Her eyes were not proud or bold like Nar, they were tired, almost frightened. He took a slow breath, stepped forward, and tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I think there's been a mistake, but you look like you've come a long way. You can ride with me to the ranch until we sort this out." Clara nodded quietly. "Thank you," she whispered. He helped her into the wagon. As they rode away from the station, the town's laughter faded behind them. The sky stretched wide above them, and the sound of the wheels filled the silence. Clara looked out at the open land and said softly, "It's so quiet here." "I think I'll like that." Eli didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to think. He had ordered a bride, a simple woman who might share his days and help him with chores. Instead, he had been sent someone the world already knew too well, someone carrying a past that would follow her like a shadow. Yet when he glanced at her from the corner of his eye, she didn't look like the woman from the stories. She looked lost, worn out, and very human. When they reached the ranch, the dogs barked and the horses lifted their heads. Eli helped her down and showed her the small wooden house. "You can rest here," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'll send a message to the agency tomorrow." Clara looked around the room, simple furniture, a warm fire, clean but plain. "It's more than I had," she murmured. Eli turned away, unsure what to say. He made up the spare room for her and left her to rest. But as he walked out to the porch that night, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was she now? Why had she agreed to come here? Inside, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the letter she had carried across hundreds of miles. She had read it over and over on the journey, a letter from a man who wrote with honesty and hope. He had said he was lonely, that he wanted someone who could share quiet mornings and long winters. She had accepted because she wanted the same thing, peace. But she knew she would not be welcomed anywhere easily. The world had made sure of that. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The wind pressed against the windows and he kept hearing her voice in his mind, gentle, calm, and full of something he couldn't name. When morning came, he found her already awake, boiling water on the stove. The smell of coffee filled the small kitchen. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "I wanted to," she replied without turning around. "I thought it might make things easier." Eli nodded. They sat at the small table, drinking quietly. He noticed the way she held the cup, careful, graceful, as if she was afraid to break something. As the days passed, Clara stayed. The agency took weeks to reply, and in that time she began helping around the ranch. She cooked, cleaned, and learned to milk the cows. She moved through her chores with quiet energy, never complaining, never asking for much. Eli tried to keep his distance, but he found himself watching her more often. She laughed softly at the calves, talked to the horses as if they could understand her, and once he saw her crying quietly behind the barn when she thought no one was watching. He didn't ask why. He just left a clean handkerchief on the fence post the next morning. One afternoon he rode into town for supplies. When he returned, he found Clara sitting on the porch watching the sunset. She looked peaceful, almost happy. "You have a beautiful view here," she said. "It's quiet," Eli replied. "That's what I like about it," she whispered. For the first time, Eli smiled. Something inside him began to change. He stopped thinking about the mistake and started thinking about the woman in front of him. The one who worked hard, spoke softly, and never once complained about her past. Still, he knew what people in town were saying. He had heard them whispering when he passed by. "The rancher's wife, no, she's that woman from Chicago." It made him angry, not because of what they said, but because of how wrong they were about her. That night, as he closed the stable door, he looked toward the house and saw Clara standing at the window, her face lit by the lantern's glow. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He didn't know what the agency would say when their letter arrived. Maybe they would take her back. Maybe they would send the real bride he had ordered. But deep down, Eli felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew that something unexpected had begun. It wasn't love yet, but it was something close. The beginning of trust, born in the quiet of a Montana evening, between two people who had both come a long way just to find peace. The cold morning wind moved softly through the ranch, carrying the smell of hay and earth. Weeks had passed since Clara Weston arrived at Eli Turner's ranch, and though neither of them had planned it, life between them had quietly found its rhythm. Every morning, Clara woke before sunrise and made coffee. Eli would be outside feeding the horses or fixing the fence, and by the time he came back, breakfast would already be waiting on the table. At first, they spoke only a little. But slowly, their silences began to feel comfortable. Clara would sometimes ask about the animals, and Eli would answer in short, gentle words. The house that once felt empty now had the sound of dishes, footsteps, and a woman's soft humming drifting through it. Still, Clara knew she didn't belong. Every letter from the mail agency took weeks to arrive, and each day she wondered if the next letter would be the one that told her to leave. She didn't say anything, but Eli could sense her worry. He saw it in her eyes whenever he brought the mail from town. One afternoon, while she was hanging clothes outside, a few neighbors rode by. They stopped to talk to Eli but kept glancing at her. Their voices were polite, but their smiles were sharp. "She's got herself quite a story, hasn't she?" one of them said. "Didn't expect to see her living like a wife out here." Eli's hands tightened around the rope he was holding. "She's working hard," he said in a steady voice. "That's more than I can say for most." The men laughed uncomfortably and rode away. When Eli turned back, Clara was gone from the yard. He found her inside, folding the same shirt again and again, her hands shaking slightly. "I heard them," she said quietly. "They'll never let me forget who I was." Eli wanted to tell her not to care, but he knew it wasn't that easy. "People talk because they've got nothing better to do," he said. "But talk doesn't change who you are now." She gave him a small, sad smile. "That's kind of you, Eli, but words stay, even when people forget why they said them." He didn't know how to reply, so he just nodded and helped her with the laundry. That night, when she went to her room, he stayed up late by the fire, staring at the letter from the agency that still hadn't given any answer. Days turned into another week. The snow on the mountains melted and spring began to warm the land. Clara started planting flowers near the porch, bright little patches of color in the brown earth. Eli watched her kneel in the dirt, her hands covered in soil, and thought she looked more like a piece of the ranch than a stranger now. One morning, he found her sitting near the fence, her eyes following the horizon. "Do you miss the city?" he asked softly. She shook her head. No, the city was full of noise and smoke and people who pretended to be happy. "Out here it's quiet, sometimes too quiet, but at least it's real." He nodded slowly. "You're different from what they say." Her lips curved into a gentle smile. "They only know what I used to be, not who I wanted to become." That day, Eli realized that she wasn't just hiding from her past. She was trying to build something new. And he wanted to be part of that new life. A few days later, a letter finally came from the agency. Eli found it at the post office when he went into town for supplies. The clerk, an older man who liked to gossip, handed it over with a knowing smirk. "Looks like they finally fixed your little mistake," he said. "I heard your real bride's ready to come now." Eli took the envelope without answering and left quickly. On the way home, the horses trotted quietly as the letter lay heavy in his pocket. By the time he reached the ranch, the sun was already dipping low behind the hills. Clara was sitting on the porch steps waiting for him. "You got mail?" she asked softly. He handed it to her, his throat dry. She looked at the handwriting and knew what it was before she even opened it. The paper trembled in her hands as she read the few lines that confirmed it. She had been sent by mistake, and the correct bride was ready to leave for Montana next week. Clara closed the letter and took a slow breath. "Well," she said quietly, "it looks like everything's right again." Eli stared at her. "Right?" he repeated. "That doesn't feel right to me." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Eli, you know this isn't my place. I never belonged here. I was never supposed to come. They'll send someone else, and someone good, someone proper. You deserve that." He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You think you're not good because of what people said? Because of what you went through? You've worked harder here than anyone I've ever known. You've made this house feel alive again. You've done more for me than you realize." She turned away, trying to hold her tears. "You don't understand. People will never stop talking. You'll lose your peace because of me." "I already lost my peace before you came," he said gently. "And for the first time in years, I have it again. Not because you were sent here, Clara, but because you stayed." The silence stretched between them. The air was thick with the sound of the evening wind and the distant cry of a bird. Finally, she whispered, "You shouldn't say things you don't mean." He smiled sadly. "I mean every word." The next morning, Clara began packing. She folded her few dresses carefully, placing them in the small suitcase she had brought from Chicago. Eli watched her from the doorway, his heart heavy. When she was done, she stood by the wagon ready to leave. "Thank you for your kindness," she said quietly. "You were the first man in a long time who treated me like a person." He swallowed hard. "And you were the first woman in a long time who made this place feel like home." She hesitated, her hands gripping the suitcase. "Goodbye, Eli," he didn't reply. Instead, he took the letter from his pocket, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall into the dirt. "You're not going anywhere," he said softly. "If you still want peace, stay here. Stay with me." Clara's breath caught. "You'd choose me after everything?" "I don't care about everything," he said. "I care about now." Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she let them fall. She dropped the suitcase and covered her face with her hands, shaking quietly. Eli stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. From that day, the letters stopped. The agency never wrote again, and no one came looking. Life went on quietly at the Turner Ranch. The flowers Clara planted grew tall and bright by the porch. The townspeople still whispered sometimes, but Eli never listened. Months later, travelers passing through would see the couple working side by side, the rancher and the woman with the red hair, smiling as they mended fences or fed the animals together. To them, it looked like any ordinary marriage. But to Eli and Clara, it was something deeper. Every night, as the stars spread across the Montana sky, they would sit on the porch, drinking coffee and talking about small things, the weather, the horses, the smell of rain. Sometimes they said nothing at all, and that silence was enough. Clara often looked at the horizon and said softly, "I never thought peace could look like this." Eli would glance at her and answer, Sometimes peace comes after a long fight, and sometimes it comes when you stop running. She smiled every time he said that, and though her past was something she could never erase, she learned that it didn't have to define her. She wasn't the woman people whispered about anymore. She was the woman who found her place, not through luck, but through courage, forgiveness, and quiet love. And Eli, the lonely rancher who once waited for a stranger to bring him companionship, found something far greater than he ordered. He found a heart that matched his own, strong, scarred, but still open to the simple, beautiful peace of a shared life beneath the endless Montana sky.